Mr. President.
The senior senator from Texas is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President. And, Mr. President, because the senator from Ohio is in the chair, I would just like to say that I'm very pleased that we have been able to pass a bus safety bill that was a response to two tragic bus accidents, one in Ohio and one in Texas, and the many other bus accidents that have happened because the buses that often transport people in our commerce are not safe. But I think that we have strengthened those safety regulations working together and appreciate very much the effort that the senator from Ohio made. Mr. President, I rise today to speak about the looming tax cliff that will affect every American who pays taxes at the end of this year. The Senate must be clear with the American people about what our priorities are and what the ownership of the money made by hardworking Americans is. Does this money belong to the government to decide what will be done with that money, or except for our responsibility to add to the things that our federal government should do, should that money belong to the people who earned it? And I think that is one of the key issues that we are facing right now in this Congress and most certainly in the campaign. The American dream is that anyone who is willing to work hard in this country can start from nothing and through hard work and sacrifice become a success. It is the defining characteristic of our country, and it is what has made us a shining example of people all over the world. But that dream is under threat if at the end of this year, all of a sudden, because we don't address the major tax hikes that will affect all Americans, that hard work and sacrifice will simply result in giving a larger portion of people's paychecks to their government. If we do not enact relief, every single person who pays taxes faces an increase on January 1st. Every single person. Every person will move into a higher bracket and face a higher rate of taxation. If we do not enact relief, small businesses will be hit with higher taxes, entrepreneurship will be discouraged, owners will not invest to grow their businesses, and hiring will remain in a deep freeze. And there can be no argument in this country that hiring is in a deep freeze. We have had unemployment rates above 8% over the last 3.5 years. That is stagnation, and it is certainly a freeze. If we don't enact relief, marriage will continue to be penalized at a greater rate than it is today. Higher burdens across the board, strangled growth and job creation, and an inexplicable punishment for married Americans. These are insurmountable obstacles to what will free our economy to grow and create jobs that will bring that unemployment rate down. The marriage penalty, which is an issue that I have championed since I came here, and we were able to do something about it. The marriage penalty pushes people who are working and single and get married into a higher bracket. If two single people paid taxes on their own earnings, it would be at a lower rate than when they get married. One of the highest priorities that I've had in the Senate has been to relieve Americans from this punitive burden. After years of fighting for fairness, the 2001 and 2003 tax cuts included my bill as an amendment. It made great strides toward eliminating the marriage penalty by lowering the tax rates, doubling the standard deduction, which had not been the case before, and simplifying other elements of the tax code. Prior to this tax relief, an estimated 25 million couples paid a penalty for being married, say in 1999, of approximately $1,400. Just by doubling the standard deduction, we have been able to give relief since 2001. But if we don't do something by the end of this year, that marriage penalty goes back. So we will not have the standard doubling of the standard deduction. So let's say a Houston policeman with a taxable income of $50,000 and a San Antonio school teacher with a taxable income of $40,000 are getting married this year. How would their taxes compare if they were filing as a married couple or as two single taxpayers? For this year, filing jointly as a married couple, they would save $500 because we have marriage penalty relief. However, when the relief expires at the end of this year, they would pay $800 more, not save $500, because they're filing jointly. This is the time when they need the money the most. They're starting a family, they'd like to buy a house, maybe get started with that, and yet we would penalize them for entering the institution that makes our culture more stable and certainly work in the best way. In this economy, every dollar matters, and many households do rely on two incomes. So how is it that Congress has decided that we should penalize people who are working extra hours, extra hard, to begin their lives as a family? My bill, Senate Bill 11, provides permanent relief by raising the standard deduction for married couples, doubling it. Two single people get married, the standard deduction should double. Increasing the 15% tax bracket for married joint filers to twice that of single filers. That's very key, because that 15% bracket is the people making the lowest amount who are paying taxes. So if we double before they have to go into the next bracket, that's going to give them significant relief. And we also extend the Earned Income Tax Credit marriage penalty relief. So if you are actually not paying taxes, but you make such a low salary that we are rewarding you for not going on welfare, it would also double that relief. Now, I offered my bill as an amendment last week, but we were not able to vote on amendments last week, so I'm going to continue to offer this as an amendment as we consider a myriad of options for tax relief for our countrymen. Because if we don't do something by the end of the year, not only are these taxes going to go into effect, but many, many others. I urge my colleagues to work with me in extending this relief. Now, we have an outsourcing bill that is going to be coming to the floor for a vote today. And we must create a job creators bill, which is what this bill purports to do. It is very important, though, that we look at some of the major issues facing corporations, who are our job creators in many instances, and see what they really need for relief. Today, we have the dubious honor in America of having the highest corporate tax rate in the world. Now, we used to be second, but just recently Japan changed their corporate tax rate and lowered it so that they would not have the confiscatory taxes that would discourage Japanese companies to invest in Japan. So now America has the highest corporate tax rate in the world. So on top of punishing businesses with that high tax rate, our home front looks even less business-friendly when you consider the mountain of regulations, the burdens of the President's new health care mandates, and the lack of a long-term comprehensive tax plan. The bill that the Senate is now considering would be another punitive attack on companies and will hamper business growth. Instead, with unemployment rates above 8% for 41 straight months, we should be doing everything in our power to spur hiring in the private sector. And we need for the President of the United States, the leader of the greatest nation on earth, to recognize, respect, and encourage the job creators who are investing in our country, which helps everyone get a shot at success. Unfortunately, last Friday, the President shocked many Americans with his comment, "If you've got a business, you didn't build that. Somebody else made that happen." This highlighted, Mr. President, the fundamental difference in the way the President and many of us in Congress view the hard work that Americans put into achieving the American dream. The American dream is that somebody can come to this country, they can start with nothing, they can build and work and sacrifice and give their kids a better chance than they had. That's why people have been coming to this country for over 100 years. My office received calls and letters from all over Texas when they heard the President's comment last week. And I'm going to give you some excerpts from one small business owner in Beaumont, Texas. "I have to say that I'm appalled by President Obama's recent statement about small businesses not being responsible for their own success. I'm a small business owner, and I can assure you that I built the business from nothing. I sure didn't get any government help. I gave my all to grow this business. I was not given the idea or the plans for building a successful business. An idea, a dream, and a risk. That's what mine and all of America's small businesses have been built on." He goes on to say, "I put everything on the line, including my wife's wedding ring. With over 20 years of hard work, my wife and I have grown the company from 4 employees to 40. When we first began our venture, she worked a full-time job to supplement our income while I ran the operation, and together raised our children. Nobody did that for us. We worked hard. We take pride in customer service and the quality of our work, as well as giving back to our community. This has created customer loyalty and allowed us to expand, not a government handout." Mr. President, our goal should be to spur the growth, encourage hiring, and support the millions of small businesses that have served as the backbone of our economy, not to extinguish the entrepreneurial spirit and innovation that built this country. That is what it just doesn't seem like our President relates to. What built this country is innovation, taking risk, and entrepreneurship. And we have established an education system, and at least we used to have a regulatory system that encouraged business, that encouraged the private sector. You know, a few weeks before the President said that these small business people didn't do it on their own, he said, you know, the private sector isn't in trouble, it's the government sector that's in trouble. Oh, my gosh. You just think, who's he talking to? Who is he relating to? Because it is small business people and big business people and all business people that are creating the jobs, that create more jobs, that make a vibrant economy. It isn't government. Government sometimes gets in the way, and sometimes worse. It takes away from the vibrance of our economy. So it is time for the leaders of our country in Congress and in the White House to get a perspective on who can create a vibrant economy and who is not the government. It is the business sector, and especially the small business sector, because they're growing. And if they grow, they create jobs for more people. So, Mr. President, I hope that this Congress at some point will start working on tax reform and regulatory relief and relief from the oppressive health care system that is going to also take a major effect at the beginning of next year, and say, what can we do together to spur private sector growth that will create jobs in the private sector that contribute to the economy, not withdraw from it. I only hope that we can all pursue the American dream and be the leaders that can make it happen for more people. And thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor. Mr. President.
The senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the letter from which I read in my statement to follow my statement.
If there's no objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President.
Senator from Oregon is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I ask that, are we under a quorum call?
Senator's correct.
I ask the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Mr. President, I come to the floor today to address several issues. First, I want to talk a little bit about the Disclose Act. Earlier this week, we had 2 votes on whether to end debate on whether to debate the Disclose Act. Now, the Disclose Act is a very simple concept, and it's that folks who make very large donations to the political system disclose who they are, so that the citizens of America can know where that money is coming from. Is it coming from this particular sector or that particular sector? Is a group that is posing as blue skies for a healthier America actually working to create dirty skies for a less healthy America? Is a group that says it's for clean streams actually a group that is trying to weaken the pollution control standards and put more pollution into the streams? Citizens have a right to know where the money is coming from in a public discourse, especially very large contributions. Because right now what we have are folks who are putting millions of dollars in. Now, I ask you, how many Americans can put $1 million into a campaign? I would tell you, in the world I live in, $100 is a lot of money. People can't connect that there are folks out there who are saying that they're going to put $1 million in. And they certainly can't connect with the folks out there who are saying, I'm going to put $100 million in. I think the Koch brothers have been bragging across this country about how they're going to buy the elections so that they can control where this country heads. That is perhaps the most ill-conceived notion that there is. But at least they are willing to stand up in public and say what their plan is. At least they are willing to say, we are not going to hide and do it secretly. They're going to tell us they're putting their money in. Now, where they put their money and who that money is used to attack, we may not know. And so even in their case, we need the Disclose Act. It is confounding that so many members of this body argued for the fact that disclosure is a disinfectant. So many members of this body argued that citizens have a right to know. So many members of this body said this is fundamental to fair debate in a democracy. And then when the time came to decide whether or not this would happen, they said, oops, I'm benefiting from this a lot, and I guess I'll set that principle aside and not argue for disclosure after all. And so we had 2 votes this week in which the vote did not reach a supermajority because we had individuals in this body who objected to a simple majority vote to get to the bill. So we had to have a supermajority under the arcane rules of this body. And we didn't get that supermajority because we didn't have bipartisan support for debating this issue. And I must say to my colleagues who voted against it, if you believe in the debate in the society, you should at least say, yes, let's debate the bill. Maybe you don't like the bill at the end. Maybe you want to filibuster the bill at the end. But at least we should be discussing it. It is such a huge, huge factor in this nation. There was a time not so long ago when we had the muckraker era, and there was a series of articles that were written about how senators in this body, and I believe it was 20 articles over 20 months, were owned by different companies around this land. And those articles helped the American public understand what was going on in this body, in this very chamber. And the result was a constitutional amendment that shifted from indirect election of senators to direct election to try to free the system in favor of we the people. Now, when we came to this country, when our ancestors came to this country from overseas, they'd come from a system where wealth and power made all the decisions. They didn't have a voice. And they came to America and they said, we want to do it differently. We want to have a voice. And the first 3 words of the Constitution captured that. We the people. Not we, the rich and powerful, will write the rules, but we the people will decide how we're governed. Well, the Citizens United decision of the Supreme Court, which allows unlimited, secret oceans of money being spent with no identification, goes completely against we the people. So it's going to be up to this chamber to wrestle with this idea. This is why we should be on the Disclose Act right now. This is why we should be debating the impact. We should be debating the history of Montana. 100 years ago, folks in Montana said, our state is ruled by the Copper Kings, and we're tired of we the rich and powerful setting the rules, and we're going to take it back because we believe in we the people. We believe in our Constitution. And so they changed the rules in their state. And our Supreme Court, just a couple weeks ago, gave them a 100th anniversary present, which was to strike down we the people in Montana with no debate. The Supreme Court, 5 justices said, we don't want to have any of the information about how Montana politics were corrupted by vast pools of money. We don't want to know that history. We don't want to know how the people of that state, exercising their power as a state, reclaimed their democracy for the ordinary person. They put their hands over their eyes. They put their hands over their ears, and they said, we summarily decide against this case, against Montana, taking no evidence. That is a dark moment for our Supreme Court. It follows on from the dramatically terrible decision of Citizens United. And we must debate those issues on the floor of this Senate. You know, there are folks here who like to say in the tradition that the Senate is the world's greatest deliberative body. Well, then let's deliberate. Let's not vote against even having a conversation about some of the most monumental issues of our age. So this is a conversation that must continue. We must wrestle with how to honor the very premise at the heart of our Constitution, at the heart of our republic, and not have we the people crossed off out of the Constitution. Madam President, turn to another issue, and that is the bill that's on the floor right now, the Bring Jobs Home Act. We have a manufacturing sector in crisis in America. Since the year 2000, America has lost about 5 million manufacturing jobs, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and more than 42,000 factories. Today, America has only about the same number of workers employed in manufacturing as we did in 1941, or more than 70 years ago. And my home state of Oregon has been hit particularly hard by this. This trend, the loss of manufacturing jobs, strikes at the heart of the middle class, because these are often living wage jobs. These are full-time jobs. These are jobs with benefits. These provide a foundation for our families to succeed, a foundation for families to raise their children so that their children will have opportunity and promise. Put simply, if we do not make things in America, we will not have a middle class in America. And you can see the middle class shrinking year by year right now as we lose our manufacturing base. Now, Madam President, these jobs are not disappearing into thin air. Yes, some factories shut down because of consolidation, and some jobs are limited due to automation or streamlining. But in most cases, those jobs are still there, but they're just not in America. Not in Oregon. Indeed, those jobs have gone overseas. And China has a four-tier industrial policy that says we are going to put people to work here even if we violate the WTO agreement we have with the United States of America. And that is a huge, huge problem that we should, in a bipartisan effort, fully address. But today I'd like to share a couple letters of people who are on the front line of the disappearance of manufacturing jobs. Virginia, from the city of Hillsborough in my state, wrote, "In February 2010, my department and my company was advised we would be laid off after transitioning our job duties to a replacement staff in India. It felt like quite a blow. I'd been there the shortest time at 10 years. The longest person there was 35 years. Half of our department was laid off within a few months. The rest of us sweated every Friday, wondering when we would receive our layoff dates. We were finally all let go on March 11, 2011. 4 months after my layoff," she continues, "my husband was advised the rest of his department is being laid off after the job duties were transitioned to an offshore site. My daughter, myself, and my husband are all looking for work." We have 4 generations, Virginia says, living in our home. I have no idea what will happen to all of us if none of us can find work. My husband served his time in the Army, and he and I have always worked full-time, steady jobs. It feels like we're being punished for spending our lives working to take care of our family and keep a roof over our heads. And she continues, "America needs jobs. We want to work and need to work," and she puts exclamation points in. "We are not lazy. Instead, we are innovators and always have been. We need to regain our pride in our country, help each other, and quit focusing on greed." Virginia says, "My mother reminded me that just 25 years ago, it would have been considered un-American to take a job from an American and send it to another person in another country. People would stop doing business with a company that did choose to do so. I'm mentioning this to state that there's been a definite change of the way businesses are run, which isn't all bad. Technology and business processes change. The problem is," Virginia says, "the bottom line has become much more important than the health of America and its citizens, and that, I believe, is the cause of our current woes." And she closes by saying, "I love my country and I want it back. I admit I'm tired of giving our money, resources, and jobs to other countries while Americans lose their jobs, their homes, and their security. Please help." Dwayne writes from St. Helens. Dwayne says, "I worked at an Oregon high-tech company for 15 years until I was laid off in the middle of the Bush Depression. When I joined, the company had over 18,000 employees, most of them in Oregon. They were high-paid professionals and assembly workers with family wage jobs. When I was laid off, the company employed only about 4,500 people, still mostly in the U.S. and mostly in Oregon. But today the company has moved virtually all its manufacturing to China and their software engineering to India. Even though the company payroll is growing, says Duane, the number of employees in the U.S. continues to shrink. Almost all the new jobs are in foreign countries. You want to know where all the jobs went? I'll tell you. They went to Mexico and China. And that's because our government policies have little regard for American workers. Companies like these need to be penalized for moving jobs overseas, but instead they are rewarded, and American workers pay the price. Madam President, the policies that we're talking about on the floor today are all about the issues that Virginia and Duane are talking about. The bill ends rewards for outsourcing jobs overseas. Currently, a company can deduct the moving expenses of offshoring and actually save money on their taxes that way. That would end. If a company wants to move a factory overseas, we cannot stop them, but we shouldn't give them tax breaks to do so. I would love to be in a forum of hundreds of people, and I would ask this question: do any of you love the idea that under the Bush administration we started subsidizing the shipment of jobs overseas? And I can tell you, virtually no one would say they love that policy, because the jobs here in America mean so much to our families. The second thing that this bill does is it creates new tax credits to reward businesses that bring jobs home. If a company wants to take a production line that's located overseas and move it back to the United States, let's help them pay for the moving expenses. Now, this spring, I went on a tour called Made in Oregon, tour of manufacturing in my home state. And it was spectacular to see how many cool things were being made. In Bend, Oregon, AE Solar Energy is building inverters for solar energy on roofs and putting that power into the electrical grid. Bike Friday in Eugene is doing specialty made-to-order best folding bikes on the planet, and thanks to the internet, in order to take in that fashion, they're shipping their best folding bikes all over our globe. Kinrow West RV Windows in Pendleton and Pendleton Woolen Mills had two very different types of manufacturing. Woolen mills that go back a century, and then an RV window manufacturer that is playing a key role in our recreational business and providing these windows to manufacturers throughout the RV world, the recreational vehicle world. And then there's Oregon Iron Works. Oregon Iron Works is building trolley cars. We're building streetcars in America again, so that the cities putting in streetcars can buy an American-made product. They're building a prototype of a wave buoy that will generate energy as it bobs up and down in the waves off the Oregon coast. That prototype is going to go down the river and be installed later this year. And perhaps it will lead the way for a new source of clean, renewable energy. Vigor Industrial is building barges. Greenbrier is building railroad cars. These are the jobs and the companies that are at the heart of living wage jobs and making things in America. And we must do all we can to support them. So let's end the subsidies for shipping jobs overseas. And let's instead provide incentives and support for moving jobs back to the United States of America, to the benefit of our economy and the benefit of our families. I strongly urge my colleagues to support this bill and help bring jobs back to Oregon and back to America. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President.
The Senator from Utah.
Madam President, I rise today to honor an extraordinary American from the great state of Utah, the world-renowned author and speaker Stephen R. Covey, who passed away on Monday, July 16, 2012. He was regarded as a legendary thought leader throughout the global business community, and yet showed over the course of his 79 years that the true measure of life is not in making a dollar, but in making a difference. Stephen leaves behind a legacy filled with meaningful words and memorable deeds. His prolific and powerful writing contained the kind of personal insight and inspiration that transformed hearts, minds, and lives of countless individuals. He's best remembered, perhaps, for his 1989 New York Times bestseller, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. The book sold more than 20 million copies worldwide and has been translated into 38 different languages. 7 Habits served to prove Stephen's passionate belief that talking about principles changes behavior better than talking about behavior changes behavior. Ever the teacher and ever the student of strategies for achieving personal and professional excellence, Stephen followed his pursuit of these life-changing principles in subsequent books, including First Things First, The 8th Habit, and The Leader in Me. Covey's words, ideas, principles, and practices have been used in a variety of educational settings, from college management classes to corporate business seminars. In 2011, Time magazine listed 7 Habits as one of the 25 most influential business management books of all time. While Covey's words propelled him to become a global titan of bold business strategies and tactics, it was his deeds, often in family settings, which provided the notably personal touch found in his teaching and his training. His poignant examples and anecdotes from his personal life illuminated how to actually live the principles that he taught. Covey often shared a humorous experience that he had had with one of his sons while taking a business call at home. His son one day felt that Stephen Covey had been on the phone for far too long. So he took out a jar of peanut butter and began spreading it on Covey's balding head. Covey pretended to ignore it, so the son added a layer of jam and eventually a piece of bread. Stephen Covey used this experience to teach the principles of proper priorities, life balance, and building relationships. He demonstrated that it was possible to complete an important phone call and indulge his son's mischievous antics and create a meaningful memory all at the same time. One of his best-known principles, sharpen the saw, focused on the need for rest and renewal. Covey stressed the important impact of family dinners, family vacations, family service in the community, and families working together in the home. He recalled work parties in which his whole family would tackle a project. Instead of just laboring for hours, they would laugh and talk and eat snacks while they worked, and then they'd go to a movie once they finished. Stephen continually showed that when you put your family first, you can create a legacy that will truly last. His deeds as a father, husband, neighbor, and friend are the kind that communities, states, and nations would do well to promote and emulate. Covey's contributions to the leadership community extend far beyond his literary works. He revolutionized the field of leadership and management development with the creation of the Covey Leadership Center in Utah. The Covey Leadership Center eventually merged with Franklin Quest to form Franklin Covey, a worldwide management firm specializing in training and consulting services for individuals, teams, and businesses. His extensive client list includes a vast majority of the Fortune 500 companies, as well as world leaders, celebrities, national governments, and numerous charitable organizations. In 1996, Time magazine named him one of the 25 most influential Americans, and in 2011, Thinkers 50 named him one of the top 50 business leaders in the world. He was an inspiration to millions, a revolutionary problem solver, and an icon for business managers everywhere. It's impossible to calculate the immense amount of good that Stephen Covey did for so many people. His insight helped to shape the future of an untold number of businesses, resulting in better jobs and indeed better lives for people around the world. Stephen Covey's life mission is reflected in the mission of Franklin Covey. We engage greatness in people and organizations everywhere. Stephen Covey's words and deeds helped people discover and deploy the principles that would ultimately enable them to achieve greatness in life and in business. My wife Sharon and I extend our thoughts and our prayers to the family and friends of Stephen Covey, his wife Sandra, his 9 children, 52 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren have a tremendous legacy to cherish and to follow. Stephen taught his family, and indeed the world, that to live, to love, to learn, and to leave a legacy is what life is all about. We honor his memory, celebrate his service, and recognize that while his presence will be missed, his principles and practices will live on for generations to come. No words of tribute to Stephen Covey could be complete without a challenge to do something, to produce personal deeds that match the words and the principles he loved and lived. So I conclude this tribute with a challenge for each of us to remember. We honor best those who have gone before by living our lives with excellence today. Thank you, Madam President.
The senator from Ohio.
Thank you, Madam President. I ask unanimous consent that following my remarks, the senator from Nevada be recognized. Senator Heller.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I ask unanimous consent that Jennifer Parsons, a member of my staff, be granted floor privileges during the duration of today's session of the United States Senate.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise today because too many elected officials, too many pundits and editorial writers, too many elite economists, and too many leaders of big corporations have simply gotten too comfortable, too used to sending American jobs overseas. We've seen outsourcing time and again, from the United States Olympic Committee's decision to crown our nation's top athletes with a made-in-China beret, to leaders of American companies far too eager to cash in and shutter U.S. manufacturing plants and open doors to cheaper labor in foreign countries who don't just have a cheap labor advantage, also have weak environmental rules, non-existent or non-enforced labor laws, subsidies for currency, subsidies for energy, subsidies for land, subsidies for capital. In other words, in some sense, this whole Olympic debacle where American athletes, hundreds of American athletes at the opening ceremonies in London the United States Olympic Committee in some sense has simply said, we'll give the gold medal to China for cheating. In far too many cases, U.S. investors and executives have gotten richer at the largest companies, while U.S. workers in places like Hamilton and Youngstown, in places like Lorain and Lima and Solon, Ohio, struggle to make ends meet. That's why, Madam President, I'm here with a simple message. Let's replace outsourcing with insourcing. Let's see the Made in America label sewn into the blazers that members of Congress wear on football helmets worn by our student athletes. Madam President, I'm wearing a suit made by union labor in Cleveland, Ohio today, for instance. Let's see the letters USA stamped in every steel beam used in our country and the armored steel purchased by our U.S. Armed Forces. We must encourage companies to return to the United States, and we must discourage them from ever leaving. But right now, Madam President, we have it backwards. Our tax code is upside down. As it stands, businesses can classify moving personnel and company components to a foreign country as a business expense and therefore deduct the cost of offshoring from their taxes. So when a plant moves from Youngstown to Beijing, when a plant moves from Fremont to Xi'an, when a plant moves from Toledo to Wuhan, that company can deduct its taxes, deduct those moving expenses on its taxes and get a tax break for moving overseas. Combined with our outdated trade policy, with PNTR with China, with no real reporting requirements and even fewer, Madam President, even fewer enforcement rules and mechanisms, the current American tax law encourages companies to move jobs or offshore where labor is cheap and environmental and health standards are weak. We saw a decade of manufacturing job loss. From 2000 to 2010, we lost more than 5 million manufacturing jobs in our country. 1/3 of our manufacturing jobs disappeared from 2000 to 2010. Fortunately, in part because of the auto rescue, such a resounding success in Ohio, for instance, we have seen some 500,000 manufacturing job increase in these last 2 years. But we know what happens with manufacturing job loss. It can destroy a family which has a decent wage and then can't find a job with any kind of decent wage. It weakens communities. It undermines the tax base. It means police and firefighters and librarians and mental health counselors and teachers get laid off. But now the manufacturing sector is turning around. As I said, over the last 2 years, our country, led by the revitalization of the auto industry, is beginning to add manufacturing jobs. It's clear why our country and why my state of Ohio are good places to do business. We have a first-class workforce, a strong network of colleges and universities, manufacturing know-how that's second to none. Not only that, but companies returning to the U.S. because of higher costs associated with doing business abroad, whether that be transportation costs, higher wages in places like China, in the legal difficulties of doing business overseas. We're seeing some return, but it's unfortunately more anecdotal and not extensive enough that we obviously have to keep looking ahead and making more of it happen. That's the good news. In Ohio, we see more and more evidence that just demonstrates how companies are beginning to move operations back to the U.S. For instance, Apex Sports, based in Zanesville in eastern Ohio, produces softballs with an engineered foam core. Once made in China, Apex Sports now makes its softballs in the U.S. They got their start at the Muskingum Business Incubator, where I visited not too long ago. Roseweld Products is a small extruder in Columbus, now making its product in Ohio instead of in China. Columbus-based Priority Designs manufactures Desolve, a compostable netting bag system for yard waste. Its product is now made in the U.S., previously produced in Asia. We can do more to help Americans get back to work. It just makes plain sense to put U.S. tax dollars back into the U.S. economy. When U.S. tax dollars pay for something, like American flags that fly over our post offices, like clothing outfits in a federal agency, like any kinds of products bought by taxpayers, bought by the government. It makes sense. It makes sense on every level that those products be made in the U.S. Let me tell you about a 22-year-old family-owned company in Akron called American Made Bags. They're making bags for our Olympians and for the Army National Guard. They're making them here in America. Why shouldn't our national policies support American companies and support American workers? The Bring Jobs Home Act, sponsored by Senator Stabenow and many others with her, makes two common-sense changes in our tax laws. It's a carrot-and-a-stick approach. It gives a tax credit that any business can use against their overall tax liability for costs associated with moving a production line, a trade, or a business located outside the country back into the United States. The opposite of what we do now. In providing this tax credit, we give incentives to companies to reshore, bring back jobs that might have been moved abroad earlier to places like China or Mexico or India. 2006 alone, U.S. manufacturers claimed $45 billion in foreign tax credit, a huge financial advantage to companies that have sent jobs to China and Mexico and India. But instead of promoting job growth, U.S. tax policy rewards those companies for outsourcing. That's why we need to end the backwards practice that allows businesses to deduct from their taxes the cost of shipping jobs overseas. We need to turn our tax code right side up when it comes to U.S. jobs, promoting their creation, discouraging their elimination. That's what the business bill does. It's about time. I close, Madam President, before yielding to Senator Heller. One of the things that happened out of the auto rescue that's a bit of an untold story. In Toledo, Ohio, at the Jeep plant, an assembly plant where the Wrangler and the Liberty are put together for purchase. Prior to the auto rescue, only 50% of the components at the Jeep plant, at the Chrysler Jeep plant in Toledo, Ohio, only 50% of those components were made in the U.S. Today, 75% of those components are made in the U.S. The glass comes out of Crestline, and the seats come out of Northwood, and much of the rest of the Jeep, of the Wrangler, comes from suppliers in Ohio and Michigan. Those are American jobs, a huge increase in American jobs when you consider 3/4 of those components are U.S. made, when only 3 years ago half of those components. Those Jeeps are selling, as the Chevy Cruze is, made in Youngstown, Ohio. The components come from Ohio and Michigan and other states' manufacturing plants. It makes a huge difference in building a middle-class society. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The Senator from Nevada.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank the gentleman from Ohio for yielding. Last month was yet another disappointing month of job growth. Over 12 million Americans are unemployed. Close to 6 million have been unemployed for over 27 weeks, and 8 million have been forced to work part-time because they've been unable to find full-time work. To put this in context, since this administration came into office, the number of Americans that are unemployed has increased by 700,000. This is a 5% increase in our national unemployment rate. Home values and middle-class income have decreased, and America has dropped from being the most competitive nation in the world to the 4th most competitive nation in the world. And now, after this administration's failed policies of bailouts after bailouts, Senate Democrats are endorsing the idea of letting America go off the so-called fiscal cliff at the end of this year instead of letting businesses maintain their existing tax rates. This would effectively raise taxes on every American during one of the slowest economic recovery in modern times. While I support extending these taxes and giving our nation's job creators certainty, I believe that we need tax reform. Our code is too complex. We need to close loopholes, broaden the base, and lower rates. As a member of the Ways and Means Committee in the House, I worked on this issue and will continue to advocate for comprehensive reform while I'm here in the Senate. While I recognize that sometimes comprehensive policies may be difficult to move forward, especially in an election year, I believe that we can find consensus on common sense solutions. Since coming to the Senate, I've advocated for policies that create jobs for Nevadans and for all Americans. My state has been one of the hardest hit in this current economic climate. Nevada has had the distinction of leading the nation in unemployment for over 2 years, as well as foreclosures and bankruptcies. One part of our population has been especially hit hard, and that's veterans. Over 13% of the nation's bravest who put their lives on the line are unable to find a job in this economy. They come home from overseas to find their homes underwater or chronic unemployment in their communities. While a number of veterans have fallen on tough times financially, some have had difficulty adjusting to civilian life. Congress should make it a priority that necessary resources are made available to those who have bravely served our nation. We must also not forget the families of our veterans, particularly those who have lost loved ones in combat. So today, I'm proud to join with Senator Burr to introduce the Veteran Small Business Act, which simply ensures that surviving spouses and children are eligible for small business benefits. Congress has provided numerous benefits to our nation's veterans who own small businesses. Sole source contracting, low-interest loans, and other resources in order to help these small businesses grow and create jobs. However, should a spouse or a child of a veteran lose a loved one in combat, they can no longer receive these benefits or enroll in these programs. My legislation closes this large gap in federal law that does little for those who own businesses before their activation and were killed in the line of duty. As a member of Congress, we must honor our nation's fallen, as well as ensuring that the loved ones that they leave behind have the same economic opportunities afforded to that veteran. We should be doing all we can to provide all of our nation's small businesses with the tools needed to survive in this current economic climate. Congress needs to stop worrying about the next election and put in place policies that will not only ignite economic growth, but also get our country back to work. While there are larger issues that we must address, such as tax reform, there are smaller common sense measures, like this bill, that we can pass right now if given the opportunity. Measures such as this would make a big difference in our nation's veterans and job creators. If it's any indication of how important these issues are to Nevada, I had a constituent, Dan Lyons, who walked from Reno, Nevada to Washington, D.C. because he didn't think Washington was doing enough for veterans. This was a 6-month walk from Reno, Nevada to Washington, D.C. He felt he was not getting through to his elected officials via phone or emails. So Dan, with a tent, a map, and a plan, started walking across America to see his elected officials face to face. He walked 25 miles a day, battling treacherous weather, snakes, long, lonely miles, probably a few blisters, just for the chance to sit down and ask that we do more to help struggling veterans. I was proud to meet with Dan, and he is a reminder of what's right with society. He reminds us that we must honor our obligation to our veterans. When they have sacrificed so much to preserve and protect our freedoms, we should at least ensure that their needs are met when they and their surviving families fall on hard economic times. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor. It's the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President.
The senator from New Hampshire.
Thank you, Madam President. Is the Senate in a quorum call?
That is correct.
I ask this quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Madam President, today the Senate is considering legislation to end tax breaks included in our own Internal Revenue Code that actually help companies that want to ship American jobs overseas. The Bring the Jobs Home Act provides not only a tax credit to encourage companies to move jobs back to the United States, but it would end those tax breaks that help companies ship jobs overseas. Offshoring of American jobs has hurt the middle class, and it continues to be a real problem. There's no good reason we should continue giving companies an incentive to offshore good American jobs. We can address high unemployment by encouraging companies to bring jobs back to the United States, and the tax credit in this bill will help to reverse the trend and put Americans back to work. In fact, this incentive could help bring 2 to 3 million jobs back to the United States, according to some economic estimates. So I hope that all of our colleagues will support this bill. But I also want to take a few minutes to talk about another way that I think we in the Senate and in Congress could work together in a bipartisan way to create jobs and help the economy. Today I filed an amendment, along with Senator Portman from Ohio, that provides us with a great opportunity to create jobs in America. This amendment is the text of S-1000. It's the Energy Savings and Industrial Competitiveness Act. That is a bipartisan bill sponsored by Senator Portman and myself that will create a national energy efficiency strategy for the United States. Energy efficiency is the cheapest, fastest way to improve our nation's energy infrastructure and our economy's energy independence. It's also something that we can all agree on, whether we're from the Northeast, as I am in New Hampshire, from the South, from the West. All of us can benefit from energy efficiency. What our bill would do, the amendment that we file today, is create jobs for our workers, lower energy costs for consumers, and make businesses more competitive. In fact, a recent study by the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy concluded that our bill would create almost 80,000 jobs and save consumers $4 billion by 2020. S-1000 has broad support on both sides of the aisle. It passed out of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee with an 18-3 vote. And in addition, there is a large and diverse group of industry, energy efficiency, and environmental stakeholders who have endorsed the bill. That list includes the Chamber of Commerce, the National Association of Manufacturers, the Alliance to Save Energy, the National Resources Defense Council, Best Buy, the Environmental Defense Fund, just to name a few of the organizations on the list. Anytime we can get organizations as diverse as the ones I just listed to all endorse one piece of legislation, it's clear that there is broad bipartisan support for the effort. This legislation contains a broad package of low-cost and effective tools to reduce barriers for businesses, homeowners, and consumers. It's all off-the-shelf technologies, so we don't have to wait for something to happen in order for the bill to make a difference. And they're all efforts that will help consumers, help businesses, help homeowners save money. This is an easy first step to make our economy more competitive and our nation more secure, and still meeting the pent-up demand for energy savings technologies from individuals and businesses alike. The American public is desperately looking for Congress to work in a bipartisan way on policies to spur growth and create jobs. Energy efficiency legislation represents our best chance to achieve both of those goals this year. We need to get some energy legislation to the floor. I've had the great opportunity to work for the last 4 years with Senator Jeff Bingaman and Senator Lisa Murkowski, the chair and ranking members of the Energy Committee. We've done some great work in our committee, passed significant pieces of bipartisan legislation out of the committee. In fact, there are 15 pieces of legislation that have been passed, all but one of those with strong bipartisan votes. And those pieces of legislation are just sitting in committee because we've not been able to get an agreement to bring those to the floor. We can get an energy efficiency policy in place. We can pass this legislation. That kind of an energy efficiency policy would be one that enhances our national security, that addresses our energy needs, and that puts Americans back to work. And we can do it in this Congress if we can bring the Shaheen-Portman energy bill to the Senate floor for a vote. That's what this amendment would do. I hope we have that opportunity. Thank you very much, Madam President. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.